The night air rushed past Bryony's face with the violence of a scream she couldn't release. One moment she had been standing on the balcony of Whitmore House, the strains of a waltz drifting through the open doors behind her. The next, hands pressed against her back, familiar hands, cold and deliberate, and the world tilted sideways. She was falling. The garden below rushed upward, a dark blur of hedgerows and stone pathways, and Bryony's fingers clawed at nothing, grasping for purchase that didn't exist. Her lungs seized. Her heart slammed against her ribs with the force of a trapped animal. This is how I die. The thought crystallized in the space between heartbeats, sharp and absolute. 22 years of survival, of keeping her head down, of enduring. And it would end here, broken on the flagstones of her stepmother's garden, while the orchestra played on. Then impact. Not the shattering collision of stone, but something else. Solid and warm and distinctly human. Arms caught her with bruising force, the momentum of her fall sending them both staggering backward. She heard a grunt of exertion, felt the grip tighten around her waist and beneath her knees, and then stillness. Bryony couldn't breathe. Her face was pressed against wool and starched linen, her fingers clutching fabric she didn't remember grabbing. The scent of sandalwood and something sharper, whiskey perhaps, filled her senses. Her heart hammered so violently she was certain whoever held her could feel it. "Are you injured?" The voice was low and clipped, edged with something that might have been irritation or concern. She couldn't tell which. Bryony forced her eyes open. The man who held her was a stranger. Dark hair swept back from a face carved from angles and shadows, illuminated only by the light spilling from the ballroom above. His jaw was sharp, his cheekbones severe, and his gaze, pale gray in the dim light, assessed her with clinical detachment. Her voice cracked. She swallowed, tasting fear. Can you stand?" She didn't know. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, her mind still spinning somewhere between the balcony and the ground. But he was already lowering her, setting her feet on the gravel path, with careful precision, though his hands remained at her waist as if he expected her to collapse. She might. What happened? Another voice cut through the darkness, female, alarmed. Bryony turned to see figures emerging from the garden paths. A woman in burgundy silk, a gray-haired gentleman with a monocle. More shapes materializing from the shadows like ghosts summoned by catastrophe. "She fell from the balcony," the stranger said, and Bryony flinched at the word. Fell. She hadn't fallen. She'd been pushed. Her gaze snapped upward to the balcony, 3 stories above. The French doors stood open, golden light framing a figure in pale blue silk. Margot. Her stepmother stood at the railing, one hand pressed to her chest in a portrait of maternal horror. Even from this distance, Bryony could see the performance. The widened eyes, the parted lips, the delicate tremor of distress. And beneath it, visible only to someone who knew where to look, the faintest curve of satisfaction. "Bryony," Margot's voice floated down, pitched perfectly for maximum audience. "Oh, merciful heavens, someone help her! My stepdaughter, she must have lost her balance." The lie landed like a second blow. Bryony's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream the truth, to point at the woman above and name her for what she was. But who would believe her? The impoverished stepdaughter accusing the elegant widow of attempted murder at her own ball? "Miss?" The stranger's voice pulled her back. His hands had left her waist, but he hadn't stepped away. Those pale eyes watched her with unsettling focus. "You're shaking." She was. Her entire body quivered with the aftermath of terror and the effort of maintaining control. "I'm fine," she lied. His eyebrow arched, a single skeptical movement that suggested he wasn't a man accustomed to being lied to. "You fell 3 stories into my arms and you're fine?" Before she could respond, the garden erupted with activity. servants with lanterns, guests clustering like moths to scandal, and descending the terrace steps with calculated grace, her stepmother, coming to collect her. The stranger's gaze moved toward Margot, then back to Bryony. Something sharpened in his expression. Something calculating and assessing. Interesting, he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. And Bryony realized, with dawning horror, that the most dangerous man at this ball had just caught her in his arms, and he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to see. The chaos descended like a wave. Guests poured from the terrace, their voices a cacophony of gasps and speculation. Lantern light fractured the darkness into harsh angles as servants rushed to illuminate the scene. At the center of it all stood Bryony, still unsteady, still struggling to breathe, acutely aware of the stranger beside her who hadn't moved. "Make way. Let me through." Margot cut through the crowd with the authority of a woman who owned every stone beneath their feet. Her pale blue gown caught the lantern light, making her appear almost ethereal, a concerned mother rushing to her fallen child. The performance was flawless. "My darling girl." Margot reached for Bryony's hands, clasping them with fingers that were ice cold. Her eyes, a calculating shade of green, held warning beneath the veneer of worry. "What happened? One moment you were beside me, and the next—" She fell. Someone in the crowd supplied helpfully. "Straight off the balcony." "3 stories," another voice added with morbid relish. "It's a miracle she survived." Margot pressed a hand to her heart. "A miracle indeed. We must get you inside immediately, dearest. The physician—" "I don't need a physician." Bryony's voice came out steadier than she felt. She pulled her hands free from Margot's grip, watching her stepmother's expression shift. Annoyance, quickly masked. "Nonsense. You've had a terrible shock. You must be examined. The lady said she doesn't require a physician." The stranger's voice cut through Margot's protestations like a blade through silk. Low, authoritative, utterly final. Margot turned toward him, and Bryony watched something change in her stepmother's face. Recognition, then calculation, then a smile so sweet it could poison. "Your Grace," Margot said, dipping into a curtsy. "Forgive me. I didn't realize you were the one who caught her. How fortunate you were in the garden at precisely the right moment." "Your Grace." The title crashed through Bryony's awareness like cold water. She turned to look at the stranger, really look at him, and understood suddenly why the crowd had parted around him, why even Margot's imperious confidence had dimmed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in evening clothes that bore the unmistakable cut of London's finest tailors. A signet ring glinted on his left hand, gold catching the lantern light. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power, worn so comfortably it had become invisible to its wearer. A duke. She had fallen into the arms of a duke. Fortune had little to do with it. The stranger, "The Duke," replied, his tone dry. "I was seeking quiet from the ballroom. Your garden seemed promising until young women began falling from the sky." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Margot's smile tightened. "We are deeply grateful nonetheless. Bryony is—" A deliberate pause, just long enough to be noticed. "Somewhat prone to accidents, I'm afraid. Clumsy since childhood." The lie was elegant, effortless, already rewriting the narrative, already laying the groundwork for whatever explanation would follow. Bryony felt sick. Is that so? The Duke's stare moved between them, Margot with her perfect poise, Bryony with her barely concealed distress. Whatever he saw made his expression harden. Curious. She seemed quite steady in my arms. No evidence of clumsiness at all. Margot's smile froze. "Well," she said after a beat too long, "shock affects people differently, I suppose. Come, Bryony, we should— I believe Miss Ashford should sit down before she collapses." The Duke turned to a servant hovering nearby. "Fetch a chair. And brandy. She's pale as death." It wasn't a request. The servant vanished instantly. Margot's poise cracked further, almost imperceptibly. "Your Grace is too kind, but truly, I can see to my stepdaughter's care. I insist." 2 words, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who had never been refused anything in his life. Margot fell silent, her green eyes glittering with something that looked very much like fury. A chair appeared. Bryony sank into it, grateful for the support as her legs finally gave way to weakness. Someone pressed a glass of brandy into her hands. She drank without tasting, aware only of the Duke's presence beside her, a barrier between her and Margot that felt deliberate. "What is your name?" he asked, not looking at her. His attention remained fixed on the crowd, on the whispers rippling outward like stones dropped in water. "Bryony Ashford." "And the woman claiming to be your concerned stepmother?" "Margot Ashford, my father's widow." "Your father is deceased. 3 years now, leaving you in her care." It wasn't a question. Bryony didn't answer. The Duke turned then, angling his body so that only she could see his face. The lantern light carved his features into sharp relief. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the eyes that seemed to catalog everything and reveal nothing. "You didn't fall, did you?" he said quietly. The air vanished from Bryony's lungs. "I beg your pardon?" 3 stories. Balcony railing that reaches chest height on most women. No wind tonight to speak of. His focus was relentless. "One doesn't simply fall from such a height, Miss Ashford. One is pushed." Panic clawed at her throat. If she confirmed his suspicion, she'd be accusing one of the most respected widows in the county of attempted murder. If she denied it, she'd be lying to a man who clearly knew she was lying. "I don't know what you mean, Your Grace." "Yes, you do." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur meant only for her. "And you're frightened, not of the fall, of her. I can see it in the way you won't look at her directly, the way your hands clench every time she speaks." Bryony said nothing. She couldn't. "I am Hadrian Voss," he continued, "Duke of Blackmere. And I believe, Miss Ashford, that you are in very grave danger, and that no one at this ball will lift a finger to help you." The words dropped like a blade between them. "Why would you care?" she whispered. Something stirred in his expression, too quick to name. "Because I despise bullies, and because your stepmother is currently glaring at us as if she'd very much like to push me off a balcony as well." Despite everything, Bryony almost laughed. It came out as a strangled sound, half sob and half hysteria. "This isn't a joke," she managed. "No," he agreed. "It isn't. Which is why you're going to smile, nod, and pretend we're discussing something trivial while you tell me exactly what happened on that balcony." Bryony looked at him. This stranger, this Duke, this man who had caught her when she should have died, and made a decision that would change everything. She told him the truth. The truth came out in fragments, whispered beneath the noise of the dispersing crowd. Bryony told him about her father's death, the sudden illness, the will that should have protected her, the codicil that Margot had somehow produced 3 days after the funeral, leaving everything to herself. She told him about the years that followed, the slow erosion of her inheritance, the dismissal of loyal servants, the gradual transformation from daughter of the house to something barely above a scullery maid. She told him about tonight. "She's been trying to marry me off for months," Bryony said, her voice barely audible beneath the pretense of polite conversation. "Anyone who would take me without a dowry. But I refused them all. A tradesman twice my age, a widower with a reputation for cruelty, a man who looked at me like I was livestock at auction. And tonight? Tonight, she ran out of patience." Bryony's hands tightened around the empty brandy glass. "She cornered me on the balcony. Said I had one final chance to accept Lord Fenwick's proposal. He's here somewhere, the widower, or she would ensure I had no choices left at all. And when you refused? She pushed me over the railing. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness grew more dangerous. In front of witnesses? There were no witnesses. The balcony was empty. Everyone was dancing. Bryony laughed bitterly. She planned it perfectly. An unfortunate accident. A clumsy stepdaughter who tragically lost her footing. She'd have inherited the last of my mother's jewelry, the only thing she hasn't managed to claim yet, and been free of me entirely. Except you didn't die. Except I didn't die. Silence stretched between them. The crowd had thinned, most guests returning to the ballroom where the music had resumed as if nothing had happened. Margot stood at a distance, watching them with barely concealed impatience. "You cannot go back with her," the Duke said. "I have nowhere else to go. You have no other family, no connections. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. He wasn't wealthy enough for their standards. My father's family." Bryony shook her head. "There is no one." Margot made certain of that. "Anyone who might have helped me has been carefully pushed away over the past 3 years." The Duke studied her, and Bryony felt suddenly exposed, every vulnerability laid bare before that assessing stare. "What would you do," he said slowly, "if someone offered you a way out?" She didn't trust the question. "I've learned to be suspicious of offers, Your Grace. They tend to come with prices I can't afford. A reasonable suspicion." Something that might have been approval crossed his features. "Then let me be direct. I find myself in need of a companion for my sister, someone educated, well-mannered, capable of navigating society without embarrassing our family. My grandmother has been pressuring me to hire someone suitable for months." Bryony blinked. "You're offering me a position?" "I'm offering you an escape." He glanced toward Margot, who had begun moving in their direction. "My sister Ottilie is 19, and in desperate need of sensible company. You would live at Blackmere Hall, receive a salary, and be under my family's protection. Your stepmother would have no legal claim to remove you." "And what do you want in return?" "Suspicious indeed." "Very well. I want information. You've spent 3 years in that woman's household. You know her secrets, her methods, her vulnerabilities. I want to understand exactly what kind of person attempts to murder her stepdaughter at a ball." "Why?" "Because I have enemies, Miss Ashford, and allies who may have enemies I don't yet know about. Understanding how predators operate is valuable intelligence." He paused. "Also, I intensely dislike seeing injustice go unpunished. Call it a character flaw." Bryony's mind raced. A position as a companion, respectable, protected, removed from Margot's reach. It was exactly what she'd dreamed of during the long, terrible years. Too good to be true. Nothing was ever this simple. "If I refuse, then I return you to your stepmother's care, and whatever happens next is not my concern." His voice hardened. "But we both know what happens next, Miss Ashford. Tonight's failure will not discourage her. She'll simply be more careful next time. An accident with stairs, perhaps, or a sudden illness, or a convenient drowning. Women like her do not accept defeat gracefully." He was right. Bryony knew he was right. Margot's smile as she'd stood on that balcony, watching her fall. There had been no hesitation in it, no last-moment regret, only satisfaction at a problem being solved. "Your Grace." Margot's voice cut through the night, her approach finally bringing her within earshot. "I really must insist that Bryony come inside. The night air is dangerous after such a shock." The Duke turned, placing himself between Bryony and her stepmother with a casual movement that nevertheless blocked Margot's path completely. "Mrs. Ashford, I was just informing Miss Ashford that she'll be accompanying me to Blackmere Hall this evening." Margot's calm shattered. "I beg your pardon?" She has accepted a position as companion to my sister. My carriage will convey her directly. There's no need for her to trouble you further tonight." That's quite impossible." Margot's voice rose half an octave. "Bryony cannot simply leave. There are proprieties to consider, arrangements to be made." "Proprieties?" The Duke's tone could have frozen wine. "Your stepdaughter nearly died, falling from your balcony, Mrs. Ashford. I should think propriety would dictate gratitude that she survived, rather than objections to her immediate removal from the site of such trauma." Several guests had paused to listen. Margot's face flushed with suppressed rage. "I am her guardian. She is 22 years old and of legal majority. She requires no guardian's permission to accept employment." The Duke smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Unless, of course, you'd like to explain to these good people why you're so determined to keep her under your roof after what happened tonight." Checkmate. Bryony watched her stepmother's options close, one by one. Margot could not object without appearing suspicious. She could not claim concern without inviting questions about the fall. She could only stand there, rigid with fury, as control slipped through her fingers. "Bryony," Margot's voice was ice. "Surely you don't intend to abandon your family on the word of a stranger?" It was a threat wrapped in an appeal, one last chance to submit, one last warning of consequences. Bryony stood, drawing strength from the Duke's presence beside her, from the escape he offered, from the simple fact that she was still alive when she should have been broken on the stones below. "I appreciate your concern, stepmother," she said, each word careful and deliberate. "But His Grace is quite right. A change of scenery will do me good after tonight's accident." Their eyes met, and for one moment all pretense dropped. Margot's look burned with hatred so pure it felt like a physical blow. "This isn't over," those eyes promised. "You will regret this." But Bryony was already turning away, already following the Duke of Blackmere toward the waiting carriage. She had made her choice. Now she had to survive the consequences. The carriage moved through the darkness like a ship cutting through black water. Bryony sat rigid against the velvet cushions, acutely aware of every inch of space between herself and the Duke of Blackmere. He occupied the opposite seat, his long legs crossed at the ankle, watching her with a focus that made her skin prickle. She had just fled her stepmother's house with a stranger, a powerful stranger, a man whose motivations she didn't fully understand. Perhaps she had simply traded one cage for another. "You're thinking very loudly, Miss Ashford." His voice broke the silence, and Bryony startled despite herself. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that I know nothing about you beyond your title and your apparent dislike of injustice. I've agreed to enter your household on the basis of a 5-minute conversation. Reasonable concerns." He didn't seem offended. "What would you like to know?" "Why did you really help me?" The Duke was quiet for a moment. Shadows played across his features as the carriage passed beneath the occasional street lamp. "My mother died when I was 14, he said finally. "An accident on the stairs. That was the official verdict. She tripped, fell, and broke her neck. Very tragic. Very convenient for certain people who benefited from her death." Bryony's chest tightened. "You believe she was murdered?" "I believe nothing was ever proven, and the people responsible never faced consequences." His jaw hardened. "When I saw your stepmother's face tonight, the satisfaction beneath the performance, I recognized it. I've seen that expression before." The carriage swayed around a corner. Bryony gripped the edge of her seat. "I'm sorry about your mother." "It was 18 years ago." His tone suggested the wound had never healed. "But it taught me to recognize predators, and to interfere when I can." Silence settled between them, different now, weighted with shared understanding. "I have conditions," Bryony said. The Duke's eyebrow rose. "Conditions?" If I'm to work in your household, I need certain assurances. She straightened her spine, drawing on all the steadiness she could summon. First, I want a contract. Written, signed, specifying my duties and compensation. I will not exist at anyone's whim again. Reasonable. What else? Second, I want the right to leave if circumstances require it. No locked doors, no confiscated belongings, no debts manufactured to keep me bound. I've lived that way for 3 years. I won't do it again. Something glinted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or surprise at her boldness. Also reasonable. Continue. Third. She hesitated, then pressed forward. Whatever information I provide about Margot, I want your word that you won't use it to harm innocents. She has servants, staff, people who work for her out of necessity, not loyalty. They shouldn't suffer because of what she's done. The Duke studied her for a long moment. You've been treated abominably, he said slowly. And your first concern is protecting people who couldn't protect you? Someone should protect them. No one protected me. The words hung in the air between them, raw, honest, and painful. Miss Ashford. The Duke leaned forward, his attention unwavering. You have my word on all 3 conditions. A contract will be drawn up tomorrow. You will be free to leave whenever you choose. And no innocent person will suffer for information you provide. He extended his hand across the carriage. Bryony looked at it. The elegant fingers, the signet ring glinting gold, the implicit promise of everything that hand represented. Then she reached out and clasped it. His grip was warm and firm, his skin surprisingly calloused for a nobleman. The contact lasted only seconds, but something passed between them, an agreement deeper than words. Welcome to Blackmere, Miss Ashford, the Duke said as he released her hand. I have a feeling life is about to become considerably more interesting. Through the carriage window, Bryony glimpsed the first gray light of dawn breaking over the hills, into the unknown indeed. Blackmere Hall emerged from the morning mist, like something from a fever dream. Bryony pressed her face to the carriage window, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The house, if something so vast could be called a mere house, sprawled across the landscape in a symphony of pale stone and towering windows. Wings extended in both directions, embracing manicured gardens and ancient oaks. A fountain played in the circular drive, its spray catching the early light like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful. It was frightening. Careful, the Duke said dryly. If you lean any further, you'll fall out. And I've already caught you once tonight. Heat flooded her cheeks as she pulled back from the window. I've never seen anything like it. Few have. My family has been adding to Blackmere for 400 years. The result is architecturally questionable, but undeniably impressive. He gathered his gloves and hat as the carriage slowed. The staff will be surprised by your arrival, but they're accustomed to my unconventional decisions. Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, will see to your immediate needs. The carriage rolled to a stop. A footman appeared to open the door with mechanical precision, and then Bryony was stepping onto the gravel drive, breathing air that smelled of roses and cut grass, standing before a house that contained more rooms than she could likely count. Your Grace. A woman emerged from the front doors, her gray hair pinned beneath a starched cap, her expression caught between relief and exasperation. We weren't expecting you until Thursday. Nothing is prepared. The blue suite hasn't been aired. The kitchen's... Mrs. Pemberton. The Duke's voice cut through her fluttering. This is Miss Bryony Ashford. She's to be Lady Ottilie's new companion. Please have the green suite prepared for her. It's always ready, if I recall. And see that she has everything she needs. The housekeeper surveyed Bryony, cataloging her disheveled appearance with quick assessment. Of course, Your Grace. Her tone gave nothing away. Miss Ashford, if you'll follow me. Bryony glanced at the Duke, suddenly reluctant to leave the only familiar presence in this overwhelming place. "Go," he said, not unkindly. "Rest. Eat. We'll speak this afternoon once you've recovered." She nodded and followed Mrs. Pemberton into the house. The interior was even more magnificent than the exterior had suggested. Marble floors stretched beneath her worn shoes. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilt frames. Chandeliers dripped crystal above her head, dormant now, but promising magnificence when lit. "The green suite is in the east wing," Mrs. Pemberton said, her pace brisk, but not unkind. "Lady Audley's rooms are nearby. His Grace clearly wants you accessible. The family takes breakfast in the morning room at 8, luncheon at noon, dinner at 7. You'll be expected to join them." Bryony stumbled over her words. "I don't have any appropriate clothing. I left with nothing." "I noticed." Again, that quick assessment. "I'll have some of Lady Audley's things sent to your room. You're of similar size. His Grace will no doubt arrange for a modiste tomorrow." They climbed a sweeping staircase, turned down a corridor lined with windows overlooking the gardens, and finally stopped before a door painted soft green. "Your rooms, Miss Ashford." The door opened onto a sitting room larger than Bryony's entire bedroom at Whitmore House. Pale green silk covered the walls. A fireplace stood ready for lighting. Beyond, through an archway, she glimpsed a four-poster bed draped in cream and sage, its linens crisp and inviting. She had never seen anything so beautiful in her life. "There's a bathing room through that door," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "Hot water will be brought up within the hour. A maid will be assigned to you. Nell, I think, she's sensible and discreet." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate. "Mrs. Pemberton, I know my arrival is irregular. I want you to know I intend to work hard, to earn my place here." The housekeeper paused at the door, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Miss Ashford, in the 12 years I've served the Voss family, I've learned not to question His Grace's decisions. He's brought home stray dogs, wounded birds, a horse no one else could manage, and once, a boy from the village who turned out to be a mathematical prodigy." She allowed herself a small smile. "If he's brought you here, he has his reasons. Rest now. You look as though you've been through a war." The door closed, and Bryony was alone. She stood in the center of the beautiful room, surrounded by luxury she hadn't earned, wearing a gown torn and dirtied from her fall, and felt the last 3 years crash over her like a wave finally breaking. She sank onto the edge of the bed and wept. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Tears for her father, dead before his time. Tears for her mother, whom she barely remembered. Tears for the girl she'd been before Margot. Hopeful, trusting, naive enough to believe that family meant safety. She cried until she had nothing left, and then, slowly, she stood, wiped her face, moved to the window. Dawn had fully broken now, painting the gardens in shades of gold and green. Somewhere below, gardeners moved among the flower beds. A dog barked in the distance. Life continued, ordinary and beautiful. She was alive. She was free. She was here. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the promised bath. Servants carried in steaming water, fresh towels, soap that smelled of lavender and mint. They moved with quiet efficiency, asking no questions, offering no judgment. Bryony bathed away the residue of Whitmore House, the fear, the grime, the memories. She dressed in borrowed clothes that fit surprisingly well, a simple morning gown of pale blue muslin. When she finally looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back. Clean, composed, almost hopeful. Tomorrow she would meet Lady Audley. Tomorrow she would begin this strange new life. Tomorrow she would face whatever challenges Blackmere had to offer. But today she would simply exist in this beautiful borrowed room and remember how to breathe. The Dowager Duchess of Blackmere was not what Bryony expected. She had braced herself for cold grandeur, for imperious demands and cutting assessments. What she found instead was a small woman with sharp dark eyes and silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that had been fashionable 40 years ago. The Dowager sat in a private parlor on the second floor, surrounded by embroidery she clearly had no intention of working on. A fat gray cat curled at her feet. Her attention tracked Bryony's entrance with the focused precision of a hawk spotting prey. So, the single syllable carried the weight of judgment. "You're the girl who fell on my grandson. Into his arms, Your Grace. Not on him." The correction slipped out before Bryony could stop it. She froze, horrified by her own audacity. But the Dowager's lips twitched. "Semantics. The result is the same. You're here, wearing my granddaughter's dress, about to become part of this household through means that can only be described as theatrical." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me why I shouldn't have you thrown out immediately." Bryony sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their unsteadiness. "Because your grandson offered me a position, Your Grace. I accepted in good faith. My grandson collects strays. It's an exhausting habit." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "He's also an excellent judge of character, which is the only reason you're still in this room. Tell me about yourself, Miss Ashford. The truth. I have no patience for performances." So Bryony told her. Again. The second time was easier. The words came more smoothly, the pain more contained. She spoke of her father, her inheritance, Margot's slow campaign of destruction. She spoke of the balcony. The Dowager listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When Bryony finished, silence filled the parlor. "You claim your stepmother attempted to murder you," the Dowager said finally. "That is a serious accusation." "It is the truth, Your Grace." "Truth and proof are different things. You have no witnesses, no evidence, only your word against a woman who by all accounts is a respected member of society." "I know." Bryony kept her voice steady. "I don't expect anyone to believe me. And yet my grandson believed you immediately." The Dowager tilted her head, studying Bryony as if she were a puzzle requiring solution. "Why do you think that is?" Bryony hesitated. He said he recognized something. In her expression, he mentioned his mother. Something passed through the Dowager's eyes. Pain, old and deep, quickly suppressed. "He told you about Vivian. Only that she died, and that certain people benefited. My daughter-in-law was the brightest light in this house." The Dowager's voice hardened. "When she died, my son, Hadrian's father, destroyed himself with grief. Drink, gambling, recklessness. He followed her into the grave within 3 years, leaving a 17-year-old boy to inherit a dukedom in shambles." Bryony's chest tightened. "I didn't know." "Few do. Hadrian has spent the past 15 years rebuilding what his father nearly destroyed. He's made Blackmere profitable again, restored our family's reputation, and shouldered responsibilities that would crush lesser men." The Dowager leaned forward. "He does not do things without reason, Miss Ashford. If he's brought you here, it's because he sees something worth saving." "Or something useful," Bryony said quietly. "He wants information about Margot." "Of course he does. Hadrian never does anything for purely altruistic reasons. That would be inefficient." A ghost of a smile crossed the Dowager's face. "But he's not cruel, and he's not careless. If he's offered you protection, he means it." "Then why are you warning me, Your Grace?" "Because protection is not the same as belonging." The Dowager's look sharpened. "You are a guest here, Miss Ashford, a servant, however elevated the position. Do not mistake kindness for invitation. Do not imagine that a few weeks under this roof entitle you to more than what you've been given." The words landed with weight, I have no expectations beyond employment, Your Grace. Good. See that it remains so. The dowager settled back in her chair. My granddaughter Ottilie is spirited. She has frightened off 3 companions in as many months with her enthusiasms. If you can manage her without losing your sanity, you'll have earned your place here. What sort of enthusiasms? Natural philosophy, astronomy, fossils. The dowager waved a dismissive hand. Subjects entirely unsuitable for a young lady of her station. But Hadrian indulges her. He indulges her in everything. It is his primary flaw as a guardian. Before Bryony could respond, the parlor door burst open. Grandmother, is it true? Did Hadrian really? A young woman tumbled into the room, dark hair escaping from its pins, eyes wide with excitement. She wore a morning dress already smudged with what appeared to be chalk dust, and carried a specimen jar containing something that moved. Lady Ottilie. The dowager's voice dripped disapproval. We have a guest. Ottilie found Bryony, and her face lit up like sunrise. You're her. The one who fell off the balcony. Hadrian sent a note. He said you were pushed. Is that true? How far did you fall? Did you break anything? Were you frightened? I would have been absolutely afraid. But then again, I've often wondered about the physics of falling. Ottilie. The dowager's tone could have frozen fire. Breathe. The girl stopped mid-sentence, then grinned sheepishly. Sorry. I get excited. She thrust the specimen jar toward Bryony. Look, I found a newt this morning. Isn't it magnificent? Bryony looked at the small amphibian pressing itself against the glass, then at the enthusiastic girl before her, then at the dowager's long, suffering expression. Something loosened in her chest. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Does it have a name? Ottilie's grin widened impossibly. Not yet. Will you help me name it? Oh, this is going to be wonderful. None of the other companions liked my specimens. Mrs. Hartley actually fainted when I showed her my beetle collection. I can't promise I won't faint, Bryony said, but I'll try not to. I like you. Ottilie grabbed her hand. Come, I'll show you my observatory. Well, it's technically the North Tower, but I've converted it. Hadrian pretends to disapprove, but he bought me a new telescope last month, so obviously he doesn't really mind. She was already pulling Bryony toward the door. Lady Ottilie, the dowager called after them. Remember what we discussed about overwhelming new acquaintances? Yes, grandmother. Slowly and with appropriate pauses. I remember. Ottilie didn't slow down. Come on, Miss Ashford. There's so much to show you. Bryony allowed herself to be swept away, casting one last glance at the dowager. The old woman's expression was unreadable, but something in her eyes suggested Bryony had passed some test she didn't know she'd been taking. Or perhaps she'd simply walked into another trap entirely. Only time would tell. 3 weeks passed, like water through open fingers. Bryony settled into Black Mere with the cautious gratitude of someone who had learned not to trust good fortune. Each morning, she woke in her beautiful green suite, half expecting to find it had all been a dream. Each day, she discovered it was still wonderfully, impossibly real. Ottilie proved to be everything the dowager had warned: enthusiastic, overwhelming, utterly exhausting, and everything Bryony hadn't known she needed. The girl's boundless curiosity left no room for brooding. Her constant chatter filled silences that might otherwise have echoed with darker thoughts. They catalogued beetles. They mapped constellations. They dissected a fish that Ottilie had somehow acquired from the kitchen, much to Cook's horror. Bryony learned more about natural philosophy in 3 weeks than she had in 22 years of conventional education. And slowly, carefully, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. The Duke remained a peripheral presence, glimpsed at meals, encountered in hallways, always courteous but distant. He had promised her a contract, and a contract had appeared, written in precise legal language that guaranteed everything he'd offered in the carriage. He had promised her freedom, and freedom she had. No locked doors, no manufactured debts, and no invisible chains. He asked nothing of her except the information she'd already provided about Margot. It should have been enough. So why did she find herself lingering at windows when his carriage departed? Why did her attention drift toward him during dinners, cataloging the way candlelight caught the angles of his face? Why did her heart stutter when he addressed her directly, meeting her eyes with that unsettling focus? Foolishness. Dangerous foolishness. She was a companion. He was a duke. The chasm between them could not be bridged by gratitude or proximity, or whatever confused feelings had taken root in her chest. On the 23rd day, everything shifted. Bryony had retreated to the library after dinner, seeking solace among the books, while Ottilie attended an astronomy lecture with the Dowager. The room was vast and shadowed, lit only by the fire crackling in the hearth and a single lamp at her elbow. She didn't hear him enter. "You're reading Tacitus." His voice came from somewhere behind her, and Bryony startled so violently she nearly dropped the book. "Your Grace." She rose hastily, the volume clutched to her chest. "I didn't realize. I can leave if you need the room. Sit." He moved into the firelight, and she saw exhaustion carved into his features, deeper lines around his eyes, a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there at dinner. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I came seeking the same refuge you did." He settled into the chair opposite hers, close enough that she could see the amber flecks in his pale eyes, the slight dishevelment of his usually immaculate hair. "You've had difficult news," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. His laugh was humorless. "Am I so transparent?" "Only to someone paying attention." A new awareness dawned in his expression. "And you've been paying attention, Miss Ashford?" Heat crept up her neck. "I notice things. It's a survival skill. Learned in your stepmother's household, I imagine." "Among other places." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the book-lined walls. "My solicitor brought news today," the Duke said finally, "about your stepmother." Bryony's hands tightened on the book. "What news?" "She's been making inquiries, discreet ones, about you, about your whereabouts, about the terms of your father's will." His jaw tightened. "She's also been telling anyone who will listen that you suffered a nervous collapse after your accident and are being cared for by distant relatives." "A nervous collapse." Bryony's voice came out flat. "How convenient. It explains your absence without raising questions. It also paints you as unstable, should you ever try to contradict her version of events. She's protecting herself. She's laying groundwork." The Duke leaned forward. "Miss Ashford, Bryony, I need you to understand something. Women like your stepmother do not simply accept defeat. She failed to kill you. Now she's ensuring that if you ever surface again, no one will believe a word you say." The use of her given name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "What would you have me do? For now? Nothing. Stay here, stay safe. Let her believe you've vanished entirely." He paused. "But eventually, we'll need evidence. Proof of what she's done. Not just to you, but to your father's estate. My solicitor believes the codicil she produced may be a forgery. If we can prove that, she'd be ruined. She'd be prosecuted. There's a difference." Bryony stared at him. This man who had caught her when she fell, who had offered her sanctuary, who was now proposing to destroy her tormentor through legal means rather than simple social disgrace. "Why?" The question emerged before she could stop it. "Why go to such lengths? You barely know me." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what I remember most about my mother?" he said finally. Not her face. I was so young when she died. The details have blurred. But I remember her laugh. She laughed constantly at everything. This bright, bubbling sound that made you want to laugh too. His voice had softened, losing its careful control. After she died, this house went silent. My father stopped laughing. My grandmother stopped laughing. I stopped laughing. We became a house of ghosts, going through motions, performing life without actually living it. I'm sorry, Bryony whispered. When I caught you that night, he continued, when I saw your stepmother's face on that balcony, I thought of my mother. I thought of whoever pushed her down those stairs and walked away unpunished. I thought of all the silent victims whose stories never get told because the people who hurt them are too powerful, too connected, too skilled at manipulation. He met her eyes, and the rawness in his regard stole her breath. I help you because I couldn't help her. Because every monster held accountable is a small redemption for the ones who never faced justice. Because he stopped, something changing in his expression. Because what? Bryony pressed. Because you make me want to laugh again. The words hung between them like a held breath. Bryony didn't know who moved first. Perhaps neither of them moved at all. But suddenly the space between their chairs seemed impossibly small, charged with something electric and inevitable. Your Grace, Hadrian! His voice was rough. When we're alone, when it's just us, call me Hadrian. Hadrian! His name felt foreign on her tongue. Sacred. Dangerous. This is inadvisable, inappropriate, potentially catastrophic. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm aware. Then why? Because I've spent 15 years doing what's advisable, appropriate, and safe. And I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps there are things more important than safety. Before she could respond, footsteps sounded in the hallway. They sprang apart. Had they even been close? Putting proper distance between them as the library door opened. Brother! Ottilie burst in, oblivious as always to the tension she'd shattered. Grandmother said the strangest thing at the lecture. You must hear. She launched into an animated recounting, and the moment dissolved like morning mist. But later, lying in her green suite, Bryony pressed her hand to her racing heart and acknowledged the terrible truth. She was falling in love with the Duke of Blackmere, and nothing good could come of it. The Thornbury Ball was the event of the autumn season. Bryony had hoped to avoid it entirely. She was a companion, not a guest. There was no reason she should attend. But Ottilie had other ideas. You must come. The girl's eyes held that particular gleam that meant she would not be dissuaded. It's Lady Thornbury's annual celebration. Everyone who matters will be there, and I refuse to endure it without you. Your grandmother has already agreed. You'll attend as my companion, which is perfectly respectable. Ottilie grinned. Besides, Hadrian ordered a gown for you 3 weeks ago. It arrived yesterday. Did you think that was coincidence? Bryony had no response to that. The gown was exquisite. Deep burgundy silk that made her pale skin glow and her dark hair gleam. When she descended the staircase on the evening of the ball, she saw Hadrian waiting in the entrance hall. He looked up, and for one breathless moment, his careful control cracked entirely. Miss Ashford, his voice was hoarse. You look acceptable, I hope. Devastating. The word hung between them, too honest for propriety. The dowager cleared her throat pointedly, and Hadrian's mask slid back into place, but Bryony had seen what lay beneath it. The Thornbury estate blazed with 1,000 candles, its ballroom packed with the cream of society. Bryony stayed close to Ottilie, navigating the crush of silk and jewels with growing confidence. 3 weeks at Blackmere had restored something she'd thought lost, the ability to hold her head high, to meet gazes without flinching, and to exist in spaces that had once seemed forbidden. She was almost enjoying herself. Then she saw Margot. Her stepmother stood across the ballroom, resplendent in ice-blue satin, holding court among a cluster of admirers. She hadn't noticed Bryony yet. The burgundy gown was nothing like the drab clothes she'd worn at Whitmore House, and her hair was styled differently now, but it was only a matter of time. "Miss Ashford," Ottilie touched her arm. "You've gone pale. Are you unwell?" "I'm fine." The lie tasted like ash. "I just need air. Will you excuse me?" She fled toward the terrace doors, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a blessing. She gripped the stone balustrade, forcing herself to breathe. She should leave. Find Hadrian. Explain. Disappear before Margot spotted her and caused a scene. Well. The voice came from behind her, smooth and poisonous and horribly familiar. Bryony turned. Margot stood in the terrace doorway, backlit by the ballroom's golden glow. Her smile was the same one she'd worn on the balcony at Whitmore House. Satisfied, predatory, utterly devoid of warmth. "I wondered when you'd surface," Margot said, gliding forward. "The Duke of Blackmere's charity case. Oh yes, I've heard the rumors. The mysterious companion who appeared from nowhere. It didn't take long to piece together." "Stay away from me." "Or what? You'll scream?" Margot laughed. "Go ahead. Tell everyone I pushed you. Tell them I tried to kill you. You think anyone will believe the ramblings of a girl with a documented nervous collapse? I have physician statements, darling. Testimonials from concerned friends. By the time I'm finished, you'll be lucky to find employment as a scullery maid." Bryony's hands shook, but she forced herself to stand firm. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." "No?" Margot stepped closer, close enough that Bryony could smell her perfume, lilies, and something darker underneath. "You should be. You escaped once. You won't escape again." "She doesn't need to escape." Hadrian's voice cut through the night like a blade. He emerged from the shadows at the far end of the terrace, his expression carved from ice and fury. Behind him, Bryony glimpsed the Dowager and Ottilie, along with several other guests who had apparently followed. "Your Grace." Margot's poise faltered, then steadied. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No introduction is necessary." Hadrian moved to Bryony's side, positioning himself between her and Margot with deliberate precision. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Ashford. More importantly, I know what you've done." "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "The forged codicil to your husband's will, the systematic embezzlement of your stepdaughter's inheritance, the attempted murder on the balcony of your own home." Hadrian's voice carried across the terrace, reaching every ear. "Shall I continue?" Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Margot's face paled. "These are outrageous accusations. They're documented facts." Hadrian produced a folded paper from his coat. "My solicitors have been quite thorough. The codicil bears a signature that doesn't match any known sample of the late Mr. Ashford's handwriting. The estate accounts show systematic transfers to private holdings, and the gardener at Whitmore House, when properly motivated, was quite willing to testify about what he witnessed that night." "This is slander? It's evidence." Hadrian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Which will be presented to the magistrate tomorrow morning, along with a formal complaint filed on behalf of Miss Ashford." The ballroom had gone silent. Every eye watched the scene unfolding on the terrace. Margot's calm shattered. "You stupid girl," she spat at Bryony, all pretense of civility gone. "You think he cares about you? You think any of this is real? He's using you, just like I used your father, just like everyone uses everyone." "That's enough." Lady Thornberry herself stepped forward, her expression thunderous. "Mrs. Ashford, I must ask you to leave my home immediately. You are no longer welcome here, or, I suspect, anywhere in decent society." For a moment, Margot stood frozen. the magnitude of her downfall written across her features. Then, with a strangled sound of fury, she swept past them and disappeared into the night. But her final words lingered, poisonous and precise. "He's using you." Bryony looked at Hadrian, at his carefully controlled expression, at the evidence he'd been quietly gathering without telling her. And for the first time since arriving at Blackmere, she wondered if Margot was right. The carriage ride back to Blackmere was silent. Tilly had fallen asleep against the Dowager's shoulder, exhausted by the evening's drama. The Dowager herself gazed out the window, her expression unreadable. And Hadrian watched Bryony with a focus that made her skin prickle. She refused to meet his eyes. When they finally arrived home, she fled to her rooms without a word, ignoring his call of her name behind her. She needed space. She needed to think. She needed to understand why Margot's parting words had lodged beneath her ribs like a splinter. "He's using you," a knock at her door, barely 10 minutes later. "Miss Ashford." His voice was muffled through the wood. "Bryony, please." She shouldn't open it. It was improper, dangerous, everything she'd been warned against. She opened it anyway. Hadrian stood in the corridor, his cravat loosened, his hair disheveled, his expression dark with something she couldn't name. "May I come in?" "You shouldn't." "I know." She stepped aside. He entered her sitting room, and the space that had felt so vast suddenly felt impossibly close. She was acutely aware of everything. The fire crackling low in the grate, the moonlight streaming through the windows, the fact that she was alone with him in her private chambers at midnight. "You're angry," he said. "I'm confused." She wrapped her arms around herself. "You've been building a case against Margot for weeks. Evidence, witnesses, legal strategies, all without telling me. I wanted to be certain before I raised your hopes. Or you wanted to control the situation, control the information, control me." His expression faltered. "That's not, isn't it?" She stepped closer, her voice rising. "You caught me when I fell, literally caught me, and brought me into your home, into your protection. You gave me safety when I had nothing. But you never asked what I wanted. You made decisions about my life, about confronting my stepmother, without consulting me at all. I was trying to protect you. I've had enough of men deciding what protection looks like." The words tore from her throat. "My father thought he was protecting me by leaving everything to Margot's management. The solicitors thought they were protecting the estate by accepting her forged documents, without question. Everyone has been protecting me straight into helplessness, and I'm done." Silence fell between them, heavy and charged. When Hadrian spoke again, his voice was different, softer, raw. "You're right," Bryony blinked. "What?" "You're right. I made decisions without consulting you. I told myself it was for your benefit. But the truth is," he ran a hand through his hair, destroying its remaining order. "The truth is, I'm accustomed to control. It is how I've survived, how I rebuilt Blackmere after my father's destruction. I see a problem. I solve it. I don't ask permission. That's not good enough. I know." He stepped closer, searching her face. "I know, and I'm sorry. You deserved better. You deserve a partner, not a protector, who treats you like another problem to be managed." Partner. The word hung between them, laden with implications neither of them had spoken aloud. "What am I to you, Hadrian?" The question emerged barely above a whisper. "Truly, am I a charity case? An intelligence source? A project for your savior complex?" "You're a complication." His voice was hoarse. "You're absolutely everything I wasn't looking for, and can't stop thinking about. You're the reason I actually look forward to meals now, because you might be there. You're the voice in my head when I make decisions, asking whether I'm being fair, whether I'm being kind, whether I'm being the man my mother would have wanted me to become." Bryony's heart lurched. "You're not a project," he continued. moving closer still. You're not a problem to solve or a debt to pay. You're Bryony. Brilliant, brave, stubborn, infuriating Bryony. And I am absolutely, catastrophically in love with you. The world stopped. You can't be, she heard herself say. I'm nobody. I have nothing. You have everything that matters. He reached for her hand, his fingers unsteady as they closed around hers. Courage, integrity, a heart that cares about kitchen maids and gardeners, even when you're fighting for your own survival. Do you think titles and fortunes compare to that? Society will destroy you for choosing me. Let them try. His free hand rose to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the fire in his eyes. I spent 15 years rebuilding a legacy I never asked for. I've earned the right to choose my own happiness. And I choose you, Bryony, if you'll have me. She should say no. She should be sensible, practical, and realistic about the insurmountable gap between them. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him. His response was immediate, arms wrapping around her, pulling her close, his mouth moving against hers with desperate tenderness. He tasted of champagne and midnight, and something uniquely him, and Bryony felt herself dissolving into the moment, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling to dust. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, his forehead rested against hers. That wasn't proper, she managed. Nothing about us has been proper since you fell into my arms. She laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in years. What happens now? She asked. Now we face whatever comes, together. His arms tightened around her. My grandmother will lecture. Society will gossip. Your stepmother will rage from whatever prison cell she lands in. But none of it matters, as long as you're beside me. It was too perfect, too impossible, too much like the fairy tales she'd stopped believing in long ago. But his arms were warm around her, his heart beating steadily beneath her palm. And for the first time since her father's death, Bryony allowed herself to believe in happy endings. She should have known better. Happiness, she had learned, was always the prelude to disaster. The letter arrived 3 days later. Bryony found it on her breakfast tray, slipped beneath the napkin. No postmark, no address, just her name written in elegant script she didn't recognize. She opened it. Miss Ashford, if you value the Duke's reputation, you will meet me at the old groundskeeper's cottage at noon today. Come alone. Bring no one. Tell no one. There are things you need to know about the man who claims to love you. A friend. Her hands quivered as she read it twice, 3 times. Anonymous threats were Margot's style, but her stepmother was currently confined to her estate under house arrest, awaiting trial. So who had sent this? She should show it to Hadrian. She should ignore it entirely. She should do anything except what she actually did. She went. The groundskeeper's cottage sat at the far edge of Blackmere's grounds, abandoned for years, half consumed by ivy and neglect. Bryony approached it with her heart in her throat, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. The door stood open. Inside, a woman waited. Middle-aged, elegant, dressed in traveling clothes. Her face was vaguely familiar, though Bryony couldn't place it. Miss Ashford, thank you for coming. Who are you? My name is Catherine Voss. The woman smiled, and suddenly Bryony recognized her, the shape of her eyes, the angle of her jaw. I am Hadrian's aunt, his father's sister, and I've come to warn you. Warn me about what? About the man you think you love. Catherine moved toward the cottage's single window, her silhouette sharp against the dusty light. You've heard, I assume, about his mother's death, the mysterious accident on the stairs. He told me. Did he tell you that his father was investigated for her murder? That witnesses saw them arguing that night? That the only reason charges were never filed was because the Duke of Blackmere controlled the local magistrate? Bryony's blood ran cold. "You're lying. I'm telling you what Hadrian will never admit." Catherine turned to face her. His father was a monster who likely killed his own wife. And the son, your beloved Duke, watched it happen. He was 14 years old, standing at the top of those stairs, when his mother fell. No, he's never told anyone, never breathed a word. But I saw his face at the funeral, the guilt, the horror, the knowledge eating him alive. Catherine's voice softened with false sympathy. I don't blame the boy he was, but the man he's become. He spent his entire life hiding what he knows, covering for his father's crime. Do you really want to build a future with someone carrying that kind of secret? The walls were closing in. Bryony couldn't breathe. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth. Because I watched my brother destroy one innocent woman, and I won't watch his son destroy another. Catherine pressed a folded document into Bryony's hands. This is a sworn statement from a servant who witnessed what happened that night. Read it, and then ask yourself if Hadrian Voss is truly the man you think he is. She swept from the cottage, leaving Bryony alone with a piece of paper that threatened to shatter everything. Bryony didn't remember walking back to the main house. She found herself in her room, the statement clutched in her hands, reading words that carved holes in her chest. I was cleaning the upstairs corridor when I heard shouting. The master and mistress were arguing about the boy, about young Master Hadrian. She wanted to take him and leave. He refused. There was a scream, and then the sound, the terrible sound of her falling. Master Hadrian stood at the top of the stairs. He didn't move, didn't cry for help, just stood there, staring down at his mother's body. The Duke looked at his son and said, "Not a word, not ever, or you'll follow her." They made me swear to silence, paid me well for it. But I've carried this knowledge for 18 years, and I can carry it no longer. The statement was signed, witnessed, notarized, and it destroyed everything Bryony thought she knew. Hadrian had seen his mother die, had watched his father threaten him into silence, had carried that secret, that trauma, for nearly 2 decades without telling a soul, including her. The door opened, and she looked up to find him standing there, concern etched across his features. "Bryony, you missed luncheon. Is everything?" He saw her face, saw the paper in her hands, and went very still. "What is that?" "Your aunt came to see me." The color drained from his face. "She told me what really happened to your mother. What you saw. What your father made you hide." Bryony's voice broke. "Were you ever going to tell me? Bryony, were you?" She was on her feet now, shaking with fury and grief and the sick sensation of betrayal. "You told me you wanted partners, not secrets. You told me you loved me. And this is what you've been hiding? It's not what you think. Then explain. Explain why you let me believe your mother's death was a mystery when you watched it happen. Explain why you never said a word to anyone. Explain why you let your father escape justice while you hunt monsters like Margot." Because I was 14 years old, his voice shattered like breaking glass. Because he threatened to kill me. Because I spent years believing I could have saved her if I'd been faster, braver, better. Tears streamed down Bryony's face. "You lied to me. I omitted. It's the same thing." She thrust the statement at him. "Your aunt gave me this, a servant's testimony about what happened that night. If this is true, it's not." His voice hardened. "That servant was dismissed for theft years ago. My aunt has been trying to destroy this family since my father died and left her nothing. Whatever she told you is poison designed to drive us apart. And I'm supposed to just believe you? After all your talk of honesty, of trust? Yes." He stepped toward her, his gaze fierce. "You're supposed to believe me because I've given you no reason not to. Because I love you. Because everything I've done has been to protect you and build a life with you. By hiding the truth about your own past? The truth is that my father was a cruel man who made my childhood a nightmare. The truth is that I don't know what happened on those stairs. I only know what I saw from the end of the corridor, which was my mother falling and my father standing over her. The truth is that I've spent 18 years wondering if I could have stopped it, should have spoken up, might have saved her if I'd been anything other than a frightened boy. His voice faltered on the final word. Bryony stared at him. This man she loved, this man who had saved her, this man whose own secrets ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. I need time, she heard herself say. I need space to think. Bryony, please. Her voice was a whisper. Just, please. She walked past him, down the corridor, down the stairs, out the front doors into the gray afternoon. She didn't stop walking until Blackmere had disappeared behind her. The inn at Crowthorne was small, shabby, and blessedly anonymous. Bryony took a room with the few coins she'd saved from her companion's salary and sat on the narrow bed, staring at the wall until darkness fell. What had she done? She had fled the only safety she'd known, abandoned the man she loved over accusations from a woman she'd never met. Let poison words drive her away without even giving Hadrian a chance to fully explain, just like Margot would have wanted. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Catherine Voss, whoever she truly was, had done exactly what Bryony's stepmother had failed to do on that balcony. She had destroyed Bryony's happiness with nothing but lies and manufactured evidence. And Bryony had let her. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss?" The innkeeper's voice, nervous and uncertain. "There's a lady downstairs asking for you. Says it's urgent." Bryony's heart stopped. What does she look like? Old. Silver hair. Looks like she could freeze wine with a glance. The Dowager. Bryony descended the narrow stairs to find Hadrian's grandmother sitting in the inn's cramped parlor, looking spectacularly out of place in her elegant black silk. "Sit down, girl." The Dowager gestured to the chair opposite. "We need to talk." "How did you find me?" "Hadrian has half the county searching. I simply paid attention to which direction you were walking when you fled like a startled deer." The Dowager's attention was sharp. "He's destroying himself with worry, by the way, in case you care." Guilt twisted in Bryony's chest. "Did he send you?" "No. He wanted to come himself, but I convinced him that showing up in a state of wild-eyed desperation would hardly help his case." The Dowager paused. "I came to tell you about Catherine, his aunt, my daughter." The word fell heavily. "My youngest child, who has spent 40 years believing she was owed what went to her brother instead. She contested the will, tried to have my son declared incompetent, even attempted to have Hadrian removed from his father's care. When all of that failed, she disappeared, until now. She showed me a servant's testimony, forged. The servant in question died 7 years ago. Whatever statement Catherine showed you was manufactured to cause exactly this result." The Dowager leaned forward. "My son was a flawed man, Miss Ashford. Weak, self-indulgent, given to drink and rages. But he didn't murder his wife. Vivian's death was an accident. She fell during an argument, yes, but she fell because she stepped backward without looking, not because she was pushed. Hadrian was there. Hadrian was a traumatized child who blamed himself for not saving her. He's been carrying that guilt for 18 years, letting it shape every decision he's made. Why do you think he's so determined to rescue everyone? Why do you think he caught you that night?" The Dowager's voice softened. "He spent his whole life trying to atone for a tragedy that wasn't his fault." Bryony's vision blurred with tears. "I left him. Yes, and you can go back. After what I said, after accusing him of... You accused him of keeping secrets, which he did. You demanded honesty, which you deserved. You made a mistake in running, but mistakes can be forgiven. The dowager rose, her black silk rustling. The question is whether you're brave enough to face him again. Bryony thought of Hadrian's face when she'd confronted him, the pain in his eyes, the rawness in his voice when he'd talked about his father's threats. She thought of Margot's cruelty, Catherine's manipulation, and all the forces that had conspired to tear them apart. And she thought of the way he'd caught her when she fell, the way he'd kissed her in the moonlight, the way he'd promised to face whatever came together. "Where is he?" The dowager smiled, a real smile, warm and approving. "Waiting at Blackmere. He said if you came back, he'd be in the library." Of course he would be. Their space, their sanctuary. Bryony stood. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Don't thank me. Just fix what Catherine broke." The dowager moved toward the door, then paused. "And Bryony, when you see him, remember, he's been waiting his whole life for someone brave enough to see him clearly and stay anyway. Don't make him wait any longer." The ride back to Blackmere felt endless. Bryony arrived as dusk, painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, the great house rising before her like a promise. She didn't wait for the carriage to fully stop before jumping down, her skirts gathered in her hands as she ran. The library doors stood open. Hadrian sat by the fire, staring at the flames, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, hollowed out by sleepless nights. He looked up. Bryony. Her name on his lips undid her entirely. "I'm sorry." The words tumbled out, unstoppable. "I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have trusted you. I let her poison me against you, let her use my own fears to destroy everything we'd built. Stop." He was on his feet, crossing to her, his hands catching hers. "You don't need to apologize. You were told convincing lies by someone who knew exactly how to hurt you. The fault is hers, not yours." "But I ran, and you came back." He searched her face. "That's what matters. You came back. I'll always come back." She gripped his hands like a lifeline. "Hadrian, I love you. I love you, and I'm afraid, and I'm not running anymore. Whatever secrets you're carrying, whatever ghosts haunt you, I want to face them with you. Together." His breath caught. "Even knowing what you know now, about my father, about my mother, about especially knowing." She reached up to cup his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You were a child who witnessed something terrible and was threatened into silence. That's not your fault. None of it was ever your fault." Something broke in his expression. Walls crumbling, defenses falling. The careful control he'd maintained for 18 years, finally giving way. He pulled her into his arms and held her like she was everything. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I love you, and I'm afraid too. And I don't care. I don't care about society or scandal or anything, except spending the rest of my life with you." "Then ask me." He pulled back, confusion in his eyes. "Ask you what?" Bryony smiled through her tears. "Ask me properly, the way you wanted to before everything fell apart." Understanding dawned. He released her hands, sinking to one knee on the library floor. "Bryony Ashford." His voice was steady now. "Sure, you fell into my arms and turned my world upside down. You challenged me, infuriated me, and forced me to become a better man. Will you marry me?" She pulled him to his feet and kissed him instead of answering. But they both knew what she meant. The Thornbury Winter Ball was even more spectacular than the autumn event. 2 months had passed since the night Bryony had returned to Blackmere. 2 months of quiet happiness, of rebuilding trust, of facing down Catherine's accusations with documented truth and legal force. Catherine herself had fled to the continent, her schemes exposed, her reputation destroyed. And Margot Margot awaited trial, her crimes laid bare for all to see. Tonight, Hadrian and Bryony would make their first public appearance as an engaged couple. The ballroom fell silent as they descended the staircase together. Bryony wore a gown of deep gold silk, commissioned by the dowager herself. "If they're going to stare," the old woman had said, "give them something worth staring at." They were certainly staring now. Lord Thornbury stepped forward, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present His Grace, the Duke of Blackmere, and his betrothed, Miss Bryony Ashford." Murmurs rippled through the ballroom, some scandalized, some curious, some, surprisingly, approving. But Bryony didn't care about any of them. Hadrian led her to the center of the dance floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. His hand found her waist, warm and sure, and they began to move. "Everyone is watching," she murmured. "Let them." His eyes held nothing but warmth. "I want them to see. I want everyone to know that I chose you, not because of title or fortune or family connections, but because you're the bravest, kindest, most extraordinary woman I've ever met. You're going to make me cry. That would ruin the dramatic effect. Save it for the wedding." She laughed, and several nearby guests smiled at the sound. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for catching me, for keeping me, for everything. Thank you for coming back." He pulled her slightly closer than propriety allowed. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." The waltz carried them across the floor, and Bryony let herself be swept away by the music, the moment, and the impossible reality of her own happiness. 6 months later, the wedding was held at Blackmere's chapel, small and intimate despite the groom's title. Ottilie served as maid of honor, barely containing her excitement. The dowager sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and pretending she wasn't crying. And when Bryony walked down the aisle toward Hadrian, she saw nothing but him, the man who had caught her when she fell, who had given her sanctuary when she had nothing, who had loved her when she didn't believe she was worthy of love. "You're beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side. "You're biased." Hopelessly, he took her hands. "Ready?" She looked at this man, her rescuer, her partner, her home, and smiled. "I've been ready since the moment I fell into your arms." 1 year later, Bryony found the letter tucked into a book in the library. Tacitus, the same volume she'd been reading the night Hadrian first told her about his mother. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, and old-fashioned. "To whoever finds this, if you are reading these words, you are holding a piece of my heart. I wrote this letter on the day my son was born, hoping that someday he would find a love worthy of his beautiful soul. Hadrian was always special, too sensitive for this world, too tender to survive his father's cruelty unscathed. I worried for him constantly. I prayed he would find someone who would see past his walls, who would love him for who he truly was. If you are the one who found this letter, you are that person. You have done what I could not. You have given him a reason to love freely, without fear. Thank you. Thank you for loving my son." With eternal gratitude, Vivian Voss Bryony's tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. When Hadrian found her minutes later, she simply handed him the letter and watched his face as he read his mother's final gift. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But when he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a shifting world, Bryony understood. Some stories begin with a fall. The best ones end with being caught and held forever.